single day, like I've always done and always will.
Yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. Governor Kathy Hochul's executive budget proposal provided funding for universal school meals. According to the executive chamber, the funding will help provide free breakfast and lunch for over 2.7 million students in districts across the state. Now, this is a popular policy measure backed by both Republicans and Democrats in the legislature. The funding, which is $340 million in the proposal, has hunger advocates and lawmakers excited heading into budget negotiations. For more on lawmakers' plans to safeguard the funding in this year's final enacted budget, here's our Elise Klein.
Following the governor's fiscal year 2026 executive budget address last week, advocates and lawmakers gathered with cheer on the New York State Capitol steps to celebrate a proposal to make school meals free for students across the state. The governor's budget proposes $340 million to make lunch and breakfast free in school districts across the state. For many advocates, this is a win after many years of pushing for universal free school meals. Andres Vives, CEO of Hunger Solutions New York, says the funding will greatly impact the 2.7 million students across the entire state.
You can't teach a hungry child, and having meals provided in school, a free breakfast, a free lunch, gets us, so much further. Our children get to go to school without stigma. They get to receive a meal. They go through the school day with fuel for their minds.
Vives adds this proposal will also support school administrators to do what they love.
Feed kids and not be dealing with the administrative burden of dealing with all of the paperwork that goes along with school meal debt and school accounts and, calling families to try to figure out how we can get paid, So it is really good for the state. It saves families around $2,000 per child per year.
In New York City, school meals have been free since 2017. Some students say they have seen the positive difference this initiative has had on students over the past 7 years. 17-year-old Faith Jones, a high school senior at Brooklyn Technical High School and a youth fellow with Community Food Advocates of New York City, says she has watched friends of hers struggle with affording lunch and going hungry. But when school meals became universal downstate, she says the cafeteria culture dramatically improved.
You see the students go into line, all the students go into line, especially Brooklyn Tech. We have 6,000 students. I think we're the largest high school in the country. We all go into line, we all grab our lunch. And I think one thing that is so notable is that nobody is complaining about being hungry when they're in the cafeteria. Nobody is saying they cannot get lunch because everyone is able to have access to that lunch.
Jones adds free school meals help students enjoy lunch rather than stress about it.
So I really do see the improvements for every student. They get to more so enjoy their school experience, and I hope that for all New York State students.
There are few issues that unite both Democrats and Republicans at the state capitol, but this is an issue that has had bipartisan support in the legislature for years. However, now that the governor put it in her State of the State and her budget proposals, the path forward is much clearer. Assemblymember Matt Slater, a Republican representing parts of Putnam and Westchester counties, has advocated for universal school meals for several years. He says as a dad, he understands how important it is for kids to be set up for success. While the initiative has been funded partially in the last 2 budgets, it has never been fully funded. Now that the governor has put funding allocation for this issue aside right off the bat, lawmakers feel confident about the budget process moving forward. Slater says this state funding is imperative, especially for families who may not qualify for state or federal school meal assistance programs.
Well, that number that the governor proposed gets us to every student and every school. In my district, we are short 12 schools, 8,000 kids who currently don't qualify for the program, and the allocation provided by the governor does get us across the finish line there. And so I think right now our focus is to get the ball into the end zone.
The governor's proposal requires all school districts, charter schools, and non-public schools that participate in the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program to provide free breakfast and lunch to students regardless of their family income. The state is essentially paying for the students' share of costs for all meals served to students not receiving free meals. According to the governor's budget director, Blake Washington, the state can afford initiatives like this one because the state's fiscal health is sound. Washington highlighted $21.1 billion in state reserves and a $5.3 billion surplus from income taxes. The proposal will also continue to share costs with a state subsidy program called the Community Eligibility Provision, which allows participating schools based on a federally determined threshold need of school districts to serve breakfast and lunch at no cost to all enrolled students. The New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance Commissioner Barbara Gwynn says the state helping to share costs makes sure the school district's budgets are covered.
Schools that are eligible for the community eligibility provision receive reimbursement, but not necessarily full reimbursement for the meals that are provided at school. And then, of course, some school districts are not eligible for the federal community eligibility provisions. So in both instances, the state is stepping in.
Gwynn adds this program means students are well fed and ready to learn.
From a family standpoint, it obviously helps reduce costs that they would otherwise need to spend on providing breakfast and lunch, and also probably hopefully saves a little bit of time in their day to not have to prepare those meals. So it's good for families from an affordability standpoint. And most importantly, it's good for the children. So again, they're ready to learn. When children are ready to learn, obviously they're going to do better in school and have better prospects for their future employment opportunities.
The governor's budget proposal means students who don't already have access to free school meals through the CEP or through the National Lunch and Breakfast Program will be fed.
But this year we'll add on the balance of the schools, bringing in about almost an additional 300,000 students who will be eligible then to receive free meals. Again, making it universal, there's no question. It reduces the stigma associated with children who may otherwise be receiving meals in a limited capacity within the school.
Assemblymember Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas, a Democrat representing Queens, echoed the commissioner's points, saying this funding will help close the gaps and financial barriers in parts of the state like Long Island, Hudson Valley, and Western New York.
What happens is even in districts or communities that are deemed wealthy, there are working class family members, there are immigrant family members, there are children who fall through the crack. And unfortunately, while their parents may be able to fill out additional forms, burdensome forms, often language barriers an issue.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle highlight many students with special meal tickets also face stigma. At a recent press conference, State Senator Dean Murray, a Republican representing parts of Suffolk County, says when he was a student with a free school meal pass, he was often teased.
And I would get my red tickets that I would take in, and in the morning I'd show my ticket to get my breakfast, and at lunch my ticket to get my lunch. And then the kids started noticing that was different from them. And then they found out why, because I was the poor kid. Here's the poor kid. Why are we paying for you? This, that, the other. The teasing got so bad, and the bullying. I stopped eating. I just threw the tickets away. And unfortunately, we have kids that are doing that now.
Murray says by making school meals universal, every student will be on equal footing.
Everyone gets it. No one is different, no one to be bullied, and most importantly, every child gets fed. And that's our goal. So with that, I hope everyone will understand why we are pushing so hard to get this done.
Some lawmakers say the main pushback against fully funding this initiative in previous state budgets is the cost. Some lawmakers told WMHT concerns have come up as part of the larger spending conversation of the state budget, but there doesn't appear to be any direct opposition to this measure. Moving forward, lawmakers will have to safeguard the $340 million proposal from potential cuts, which can happen during the budget process as priorities are weighed.
The pushback always is the cost, but I think we've really made the strong effort and have really demonstrated the fact that this investment, yes, there's a cost associated to it, but that investment that we're making is in our kids. And if we're not feeding hungry children, then I don't know what we're doing up here. And so we've really, I think, done a good job bringing Republicans and Democrats together on an important issue like this.
Assemblymember Ed Raw, a Republican representing Nassau County and a ranking member of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, says the budget process moving forward, public hearings, negotiations, and voting on budget bills should move smoothly for this proposal.
The cost, yes, that's a lot of money, but you think about it in the context of our school aid number, like it's really a tiny fraction. So I think everybody's on the same page, and it should be something that everybody is on board with.
Assemblymember Steve Otis, a Democrat representing parts of Westchester County, echoed Raw's message, emphasizing the support for this measure.
The negotiation is the key part of the budget process, so everything is connected to everything else. But I'm fairly optimistic. The strong support for this, and just knowing how important this is for the education process and for the health of kids.
For other Democrats in the Assembly, the fact that the governor put this measure in her budget proposal means the measure will very likely have the support it needs to become official.
And now that the governor's put it in a budget, we feel very confident it's going to move forward. It's been in the one House budgets in the Assembly. It's been in the one House budgets in the Senate. So I feel very confident that it's going to move forward, and we'll be able to celebrate once the ink is dry on the budget.
Gonzalez Rojas adds this budget measure this year could solidify it to become a permanent part of the state budget in years to come, even with a potential change in executive leadership next year.
I really anticipate this solidifying this measure in years to come. I don't see how a governor robs food off the tables of children in schools. So this is something, again, that has bipartisan support. And we really anticipate it being a very successful program and one that we'll immediately see the benefits of.
Some political experts say Governor Hochul's initiative this year is all part of the governor's affordability focus for this year. Sean Donahue, a political professor at SUNY Buffalo, says the governor's budget proposal is right in line with her affordability agenda for this year. Donahue also says this measure seems to have gained momentum nationally over the past year.
It seemed like it kind of got a big boost last year whenever Governor Tim Walz became the Democratic nominee for vice president, because Minnesota had put this in place. So it's something that you've seen some of the blue states, so states where Democrats are in control of the legislature and the governorship, have pushed through.
If this measure is adopted in the final state budget, New York will become the 9th state in the country to make school meals universally free. The governor's proposal is only one step in this process to officially make school meals universally free. The next step at this point is budget hearings, where lawmakers question experts, advocates, and leaders on issues like this one. The budget hearings started earlier this week and are set to continue until the end of February. Elise Klein, New York Now.
And for more on the funding for universal school meals, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Now turning to another topic. As we discussed last week on the show, President Donald Trump has signed a slew of executive orders aimed at immigration policy. Now, this week, there were several reports of ICE raids and arrests in major cities across the country, including New York City. To unpack the impact of the executive orders, the legal challenges ahead, and the state's role in protecting immigrants, we sat down with Murad Awawdeh, President and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Murad.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, under a recent executive order, President Donald Trump has moved to end birthright citizenship. Now, I wanted to get your reaction to this measure as someone who understands the struggles of immigrant communities in New York.
Well, as you know, President Trump was just elected recently, but inaugurated on Monday, and immediately passed a slew, signed a slew of executive orders and actions that were straight up anti-immigrant. None of them were to actually make America safer. And in this moment, what we're seeing is even with the birthright citizenship executive action, a judge just less than 24 hours ago put a nationwide injunction on it, saying that it is unconstitutional. So a lot of these actions we believe are unconstitutional, and we're waiting to see how they come out of how the court system processes them in this moment.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the federal judge temporarily blocked that executive order. So are there any plans for the New York Immigration Coalition to be involved with or assist in any legal challenges to this measure?
Yeah, so we're assessing the executive orders currently, and we've already filed with our national partners, the National Immigration Law Center, Freedom of Information request on the rescission of the sensitive locations directive to understand what decision-making thoughts went into that. so that we have a better understanding of what's happening within the Department of Homeland Security in this moment. And we are assessing which other executive actions we are going to take action on. Additionally, we're working at the local level here across the state, as well at the state level, to actually protect and defend our communities, which is why we're fighting for the New York for All Act, which would say that the state of New York will not invest any resources to collude with immigration enforcement, and collude with family separation and harming our communities and our local economies, as well as fighting for additional immigration legal services funding of $165 million to make sure that people aren't going up against a government-trained prosecutor and judge whose sole job is to remove them from this country.
And in addition to that executive order, the president also signed an order stripping churches and schools of immigration enforcement protection. So can you help us put that into context? What do you think the implications of a measure like this will be? And we'll get into, of course, your state efforts after.
The rescission of the sensitive locations memo is just heartless. It is trying to inflict even more fear and chaos in communities across the state of New York and this country. I think whenever anyone thinks a safe haven or a place where you will be safe is a hospital or your school or your place of faith. And that memo pretty much said that ICE will not operate in those spaces. But this administration is, again, not leaning into the safety and security of our country. They're leaning into cruelty. And that's the point of this, is when they rescinded that, they're saying we're going after everyone everywhere, regardless of, your sensibilities or where you think you may be safe. We're coming for you everywhere. And that's just gutless and heartless in this moment.
And from your purview, what role should New York and the legislature play in sort of combating these efforts and protecting the rights and freedoms of immigrants while this is a federal, measure?
Well, as you know, New York has been known to lead in the nation, and we're looking to New York to lead again. We need the state legislator and the governor to lead in this moment and helping us pass the New York for All Act, which would stop the state from using any of its resources to collude with family separation, harming our communities, and gutting our local economies. New York for All Act will ensure that New Yorkers feel safe in the state of New York, that their state is not harming them. Additionally, we're fighting for increased resources for legal services of $165 million to ensure that people in deportation proceedings get the help that they need. They're going up against government-trained prosecutors and judges whose sole job is to remove them from this country. And what we do know is that our community's contributions are huge here in the state of New York, contributing over $68 billion in combined taxes to the state, having the spending power of $150 to $200 billion. Those are not little numbers. Those are not, minuscule impacts that we are going to not feel. Every aspect of life here in New York is touched by an immigrant one way or the other, from our food being, planted, picked, stocked in stores and sold in immigrant small businesses. These are all things that continue to nourish not just us individually, but our state, to our healthcare workers who are a majority who are immigrants. These are attacks on every single aspect of life here in New York, and we need the state of New York to fight back against this mass deportation plan.
And from a legal perspective, if these measures go unchecked, what will be the long-term implications for immigrants around the country and here in New York?
Well, the president's executive actions are being checked, and they are being litigated in this moment. So we'll see how the court process proceeds. We're already seeing good indications that, as we thought, some of these actions are unconstitutional. But what we do need is leaders to stand up and to fight back. We need our political leaders to stand up and fight back. If not, we're going to have real serious problems on our hands, like in a state like New York, where 1/4 of our population is immigrant, where 5 million workers in the state are immigrants, and we can't live without immigrants. New York is has been built by every wave of immigrants and will continue to. There is no New York without immigrant New York. So it's really important that our state leaders stand up and fight back in this moment, to fight for families, to fight for our communities, and to fight for everything that we love about our state.
And we did some reporting recently on some state policies to help immigrant communities, such as the New York for All Act, which you mentioned, the Dignity Not Detention Act, and the Legal Representation Act. Now, can you start by telling us how these policies could potentially help immigrant communities this year? And also, I wanted to get into some of the strategy that you'll be putting forth this session, as I know these aren't necessarily new policy issues that you're taking up.
Yeah, the New York for All Act is pretty simple. It says that the state of New York will not use any of its resources to collude with immigration enforcement, because that's a federal responsibility, not the state's. It also says that we are not going to collude with the separation of family and the harming of communities. And I think that that is the floor. And that's why we are asking that our state legislative leaders, our assembly members, our senators, and our governors step up and support it so that it actually becomes the law of the land. What we're seeing already within the first week of this administration is massive fear happening. We've already seen raids happening across the state of New York, and that is going to only get worse. We need the state to step in and say, we are not going to participate in this, and we are going to protect our New Yorkers. The Dignity Not Detention Act would actually prohibit the use of jails for immigration detention. And what we're going to start seeing is that the Trump administration is going to start looking for ways to detain people and leave them in jail, regardless of whatever the issue may be that put them there to begin with. So we should not be using our state's infrastructure to support the mass deportation apparatus that's being built right now. And an Access to Representation Act is just that. It's saying that in the criminal justice system, you have a right to an attorney, but in our immigration system, we do not. So we want to make sure that people who are going up against a government-trained prosecutor and a judge whose sole job is to remove you from this country, that you have the support of an attorney who's going to help you navigate your case. And what we've seen is that people with immigration lawyers actually have a 10 times more likelihood of winning their case and being able to stay with their families and in their communities in New York.
And from your purview, will these policies be enough to help address challenges on the federal level?
They will be enough to protect New Yorkers from the federal government that is only seeking to sow more chaos and cruelty across our country. So it is our responsibility as New Yorkers to stand up and fight for one another and to fight for the dignity and respect that we believe everyone deserves.
And what do you make of the argument from Republicans here in Albany that the focus for the legislature should be on New Yorkers and they shouldn't be allocating resources to immigrants?
Well, immigrants are New Yorkers, so we should be allocating resources to all New Yorkers. So I agree with them. We should be allocating resources to all New Yorkers and making sure that they are not just barely surviving, but that they are thriving, which is why we are supporting and leading the campaign for the Working Families Tax Credit, which would give families the credit that they deserve and also put more money in the pockets of parents. And we look forward to everyone, including the gentleman who made that comment, to support the Working Families Tax Credit, which would give families at least $1,600 per child in the state of New York, a tax credit, which will go a huge way to helping families really be able to make ends meet. Everyone is hurting right now, and people have been hurting for over 6 years at this point with the affordability crisis. And that's the irony of the moment we're living in, is that when you look at every single exit poll during the presidential election that just happened, the top issue in that exit poll is affordability and the economy. The top issue by far in every single exit poll. And instead of addressing that, what we see is the Trump administration coming in and trying to create a deeper affordability crisis by harming immigrants across this country. It does not make any sense. Instead of actually trying to relieve the pressure on the American people, what we're seeing is that the pressure is about to get turned up higher.
And lastly, what do you want New Yorkers to know or understand about what is going on at the federal level and how it might affect them?
I think all New Yorkers should know that this administration has already come in attacking people's constitutional rights. And there is a saying that if they're not coming for you right now, they will come for you next. And that's exactly what is going to continue to happen. So that's why it's important for everyone to stand up and voice their concern, reach out to their congressional members and lodge their concerns with them as well to make sure that they hear them, that they understand that they're against these attacks on New Yorkers and that we're going to fight for one another. Because if we don't fight for one another, no one's going to be fighting for us when it's our turn.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
And we were speaking with Murad Awawdeh, President and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition. And for more on the details of federal immigration policy, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. You can also subscribe to our newsletter by going to newsletter.nynow.org. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,